The last night before the war. Well, howdy there, friend. Before I get started spinning this yarn for you, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button and give this old story a like. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. It's a tale that's been burning in my heart for nigh on 40 years now, and I reckon it's high time I share it proper. So go ahead, smash that subscribe button like you mean it, and let's settle in together. Schiff's in creaking wooden chair, hat tilted just right against the dying sunlight. You know, sitting here on this old porch as the sun paints the sky all manner of orange and gold, I can't help but think back to another evening, much like this one, that changed everything for a bunch of us young folks back in the summer of 43. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's getting on near 80 years ago, but some memories, well, they stick to your soul like honey on a hot biscuit. The name's Jake. Jake Morrison, and I was all of 19 years old back then, green as spring grass and twice as eager. Living in a little town called Cedar Creek, population maybe 800 souls on a good Sunday, when everyone showed up for church. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where your word was your bond, and where a handshake meant more than any fancy contract you might draw up in the big city. Cedar Creek sat nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered in oak and pine, with a creek running right through the middle that gave the town its name. Main Street was all of 4 blocks long, lined with wooden sidewalks that creaked under your boots and buildings that had weathered more storms than most folks see in a lifetime. We had Murphy's General Store, where old Sean Murphy knew exactly what you needed before you even walked through the door. There was the Cedar Creek Diner, run by a woman named Dolly who could make a chicken fried steak that would make angels weep. And at the end of Main Street sat the Frontier Saloon, though most folks just called it Buck's Place, after Buck Henderson, who'd been pouring drinks there since before I was born. Now, I was working at my daddy's ranch just outside town, the Double M, named after the Morrison family that had been working that land for 3 generations. We ran cattle mostly, with some horses for good measure. It was honest work, the kind that builds character and calluses in equal measure. Every morning before dawn, I'd be out there feeding livestock, mending fences, and learning the 1,000 little things that separate a real rancher from someone just playing at it. But that summer, everything was different. You see, there was a war raging across the ocean, and boys from Cedar Creek had been getting their draft notices regular as clockwork. Tommy Patterson got his in April, Billy Kowalski in May. By June, it seemed like every family in town was either sending someone off or waiting for that envelope with the government seal. The thing was, I hadn't gotten mine yet. And let me tell you, that was eating at me something fierce. Here I was, 19 years old, strong as an ox, and eager to do my part, while my friends were heading off to serve their country. I felt like I was letting everyone down, including myself. It was on a Tuesday evening, July 13th to be exact, when everything started to come together in ways I never could have imagined. I was walking back from Murphy's General Store, carrying a sack of supplies for Mama, when I saw her for the first time. She was standing outside the diner, looking lost as a lamb in a thunderstorm, with a small suitcase at her feet and the most beautiful brown eyes I'd ever seen. Now, I'd seen pretty girls before. Cedar Creek had its share, but this young lady was different. She had that kind of beauty that comes from the inside out, if you know what I mean. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, pulled back neat and proper, and she wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, but was clean and pressed careful-like, being raised proper by my mama. I tipped my hat and approached respectful. "Excuse me, miss, but you look like you might need some assistance." She looked up at me with those warm brown eyes, and I swear the whole world seemed to shift on its axis. "Oh, thank you. I'm looking for Mrs. Henderson. I was told she might have room for a boarder." "Well, that'd be Buck's wife, Mary Henderson. They live above the saloon, but Mary keeps a boarding house around back." "Name's Jake Morrison," I said, extending my hand. "Elizabeth Coleman," she replied, her handshake firm and honest. "But most folks call me Lizzie." I found out later that Lizzie had come to Cedar Creek from back east, looking for work as a schoolteacher. The previous teacher, Miss Abernathy, had up and married the bank president and moved to Kansas City, leaving the school without anyone to teach the children come fall. Word had gotten out through some teachers' network, and Lizzie had taken the job site unseen, traveling clear from Pennsylvania with nothing more than her teaching certificate, 2 dresses, and more courage than most grown men I knew. I walked her over to Mary Henderson's boarding house, making conversation along the way. Turned out Lizzie was 22, had been teaching for 3 years back in a town outside Philadelphia, and had a way of talking that made even the simplest things sound like poetry. She asked about the town, about the people, about what it was like living in such a small place where everyone knew everyone else's business. It's got its advantages and disadvantages, I told her as we walked down the dusty street. Advantage is you never lack for help when you need it. Disadvantage is you never lack for people knowing your business when you don't necessarily want them to. She laughed at that, a sound like wind chimes on a gentle breeze. I suppose I'll be finding that out soon enough. Mary Henderson welcomed Lizzie like she was family, which was Mary's way. Within an hour, Lizzie was settled in a neat little room with lace curtains and a view of the creek, and Mary was already planning to introduce her to everyone in town at Sunday service. Over the next few weeks, I found reasons to be in town more often than usual. Needed supplies for Murphy's store, had to pick up mail, wanted to check on Mama, who lived in the little house behind the church since Daddy passed 2 years prior. Always seemed to run into Lizzie on these trips, and we'd walk and talk about everything under the sun. She told me about her family back east, a father who worked in a steel mill, a mother who took in sewing, and 3 younger brothers who were either already in the service or soon would be. She'd come west partly for the teaching job, but mostly because she couldn't bear watching her whole world get swallowed up by the war. Out here, she said one evening as we sat by the creek watching the sunset, it feels like maybe there's still some peace left in the world. I told her about the ranch, about my dreams of expanding the operation someday, maybe raising the finest horses in 3 counties. I told her about my daddy, who taught me that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he owned, but by how he treated others and whether he kept his word. I even told her about my fears, how I worried I wasn't brave enough for war, how I sometimes wondered if I was a coward for not enlisting instead of waiting for the draft. Jake Morrison, she said, looking at me with those serious brown eyes, from what I've seen, you're about the bravest person in this whole town. It takes courage to be kind. It takes courage to care about people. And it takes real courage to admit when you're scared. By the end of July, I was head over heels in love with Elizabeth Coleman, though I hadn't worked up the nerve to tell her so. She'd started teaching summer classes for the children who'd fallen behind, and the whole town had taken to her like she'd been born and raised right there in Cedar Creek. She had a way of making everyone feel special, from old Mrs. Kowalski, who barely spoke English, to little Tommy Murphy, who had a stutter that made him shy around strangers. It was during this time that I got to know some of the other young men in town who, like me, were waiting for their number to come up. There was Bobby Chun, whose family ran the laundry and who could fix anything mechanical you put in front of him. There was Sam Reeves, a tall, quiet fellow who worked at the grain elevator and wrote poetry in his spare time, though he died before admitting it. And there was Marcus Washington, whose family had come to Cedar Creek after the last war, and who could play guitar like he was channeling angels. We started spending evenings together, sometimes at Buck's place, sometimes just sitting around wherever we could find a comfortable spot. We'd talk about everything, our hopes, our fears, what we thought the war was really about, and what we hoped to come home to when it was over. You know what gets me, Sam said one evening as we sat on the steps of Murphy's store, is that we're all sitting here waiting for our lives to start, when maybe they already have. Bobby nodded, adjusting his glasses. My grandfather always said that life is what happens while you're making other plans. Marcus strummed a few chords on his guitar. Maybe the question isn't when we're going to war, but what we're going to do with the time we have before then. It was Marcus who suggested we do something special for the town before we left. Look around, he said. Half the young men are already gone. The harvest is coming, and there aren't enough hands to bring it in proper. Families are struggling. Maybe instead of sitting around feeling sorry for ourselves, we could actually help. And that's how the Cedar Creek Boys, as we came to be known, started our summer project. We organized work crews to help with everything from bringing in crops to fixing roofs to chopping wood for winter. Bobby used his mechanical skills to keep farm equipment running. Sam, despite being quiet, turned out to be a natural organizer who could coordinate crews and schedules like a military operation. Marcus kept everyone's spirits up with music and stories. And me, Well, I knew ranching and farming, so I could direct the work and make sure it got done right. Lizzie threw herself into the project too, organizing the women and children to help however they could. She set up a system for delivering meals to the work crews, coordinated childcare for mothers who were working in the fields, and even taught evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading and writing. The work brought the whole community together in a way I'd never seen before. Catholics and Protestants worked side by side. The Chinese family who ran the laundry worked alongside families whose grandparents had come over from Ireland and Germany. The Washingtons, who were the only colored family in town and who sometimes got treated with less kindness than they deserved, found themselves welcomed into work crews and social gatherings like never before. Funny how a common purpose can break down walls that seemed permanent. Lizzie observed one evening as we watched a mixed crew bringing in wheat from the Patterson farm. Maybe that's the real lesson of all this, I replied. Maybe the war isn't just happening over there. Maybe it's changing things here too, and not all the changes are bad. As August rolled around, the work was getting done, but the shadow of the war was getting longer. We got word that Tommy Patterson had been killed in Italy. Billy Kowalski was wounded in Sicily, but alive. More draft notices kept arriving, and the reality that our time was running short was settling over all of us like morning fog. It was during this time that Lizzie and I finally admitted what had been growing between us all summer. We were walking back from helping the Hendersons repair their barn roof when she stopped suddenly and turned to face me. "Jake," she said, her voice soft but serious, "I need to tell you something." My heart started pounding like a trip hammer. "What is it, Lizzie?" "I'm falling in love with you," she said, simple and direct as sunrise. And I know that might complicate things, what with the war and all, but I couldn't stand the thought of not saying it. I took her hands in mine, feeling how small and strong they were. "Elizabeth Coleman," I said, "I've been in love with you since the moment I saw you standing outside Dolly's diner looking lost. I was just too scared to say so." We kissed there under the star-filled sky, with the sound of the creek running nearby and the smell of hay and summer flowers in the air, and I knew that whatever happened next, that moment would be perfect and complete and mine forever. The next few weeks were like a dream and a nightmare all rolled into one. Lizzie and I spent every moment we could together, and the Cedar Creek boys kept working on community projects, but underneath it all was the knowledge that time was running out. Bobby got his draft notice on August 15th. Sam got his on August 20th. Marcus got his on August 25th. And on August 30th, 1943, my envelope arrived. I was out mending fence when Mama brought it to me, her face pale but determined. She'd always been strong, my Mama, but I could see how hard she was working to keep from crying. "When?" she asked simply. I opened the letter with hands that shook just slightly. "September 15th. 2 weeks." She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then we'd better make them count." Word spread through Cedar Creek like wildfire, the way news does in small towns. By evening, it seemed like half the town had found reasons to stop by the ranch. People brought food, offers to help with anything that needed doing, and mostly just their presence and support. Buck Henderson pulled me aside at one point. "Jake," he said in his gruff way, "I want you to know that watching you boys this summer, seeing how you've taken care of this community, well, it's made an old man proud. Whatever happens over there, you remember that you've already proven yourself a man right here in Cedar Creek." Mary Henderson had tears in her eyes when she hugged me goodbye that evening. "You bring yourself home safe, Jake Morrison. This town needs good men like you." But it was Lizzie's reaction that I'll never forget. When I told her, she went very still and quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at me with those beautiful brown eyes and said, "Then we need to make sure these 2 weeks are the best 2 weeks of our lives." And that's exactly what we set out to do. The Cedar Creek boys decided to throw one last big community event before we all shipped out. We called it the Harvest Moon Dance, and we set it for Saturday, September 11th, just 4 days before I had to report for duty. For the next week and a half, the whole town threw itself into preparations. The women organized food and decorations. The men built a dance floor in the town square and strung lights between the buildings. Marcus worked with some of the older musicians in town to put together a band that could play everything from waltzes to swing music. Lizzie spent the week teaching anyone who wanted to learn how to dance properly. "If we're going to do this," she said with that determined smile of hers, "we're going to do it right." I spent the time finishing up last-minute work on the ranch and trying to prepare Mama for being on her own. The neighbors had promised to look after her, and I'd arranged for hired help when needed, but it still tore at my heart to think of leaving her. "Jake," she said to me the night before the dance, "your daddy would be so proud of the man you've become. And I want you to know that whatever happens, you carry the best of him with you wherever you go." The morning of September 11th dawned clear and beautiful, with just enough chill in the air to remind everyone that autumn was coming. I spent the day helping with final preparations for the dance, trying to keep my mind busy and my spirits up. As evening approached, I put on my best shirt and pants, polished my boots until they shone, and walked into town to pick up Lizzie. She was waiting for me on the porch of the boarding house, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, deep green like pine trees, with tiny flowers embroidered around the neckline. Her hair was pinned up with small flowers from Mary Henderson's garden, and she looked so beautiful it made my chest ache. "You clean up pretty good, cowboy," she said with a smile that could have lit up the whole valley. "And you, Miss Coleman, look like something out of a fairy tale." We walked to the town square hand in hand, and what we found there took my breath away. The whole space had been transformed into something magical. Strings of lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars. Tables covered with white cloths held more food than I'd seen in one place since before the war started. The makeshift dance floor gleamed in the lamplight, and flowers from every garden in town decorated every available surface. But more than the decorations, it was the people that made the evening special. Everyone was there, from the oldest grandparents to the youngest children. People had put on their finest clothes and their biggest smiles, and there was a feeling in the air of celebration mixed with something deeper and more profound. Mayor Peterson, a small man with a big voice, stood up on a makeshift platform and called for attention. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying across the square, "we're here tonight to celebrate our community, our young men who are about to serve their country, and the bonds that hold us all together. But before we begin, I want to say something about these boys." He gestured toward me, Bobby, Sam, and Marcus, who were standing together near the edge of the crowd. All summer long, we've watched these young men organize work crews, help their neighbors, and bring this community together in ways we've never seen before. They've shown us what leadership looks like, what service looks like, and what it means to be good men. Tonight, we dance. Tomorrow, we say goodbye. But the example they've set will stay with Cedar Creek long after they're gone. The crowd erupted in applause, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. Marcus stepped forward and said, "Thank you, Mayor Peterson, but we couldn't have done any of it without this whole community supporting us." Cedar Creek isn't just our hometown, it's our family. And that's what we'll be fighting for when we're over there. Then the music started, and the evening really began. I danced with Lizzie, of course, but also with my mama, with Mary Henderson, with old Mrs. Kowalski, who taught me a Polish folk dance that left us both laughing and out of breath. Bobby, who claimed he had 2 left feet, surprised everyone by being a surprisingly good dancer. Sam, quiet as always, found his voice when the band played some of the popular songs, and his rich baritone had half the ladies in town sighing. And Marcus could make magic happen with that guitar of his, and when he played and sang, it felt like the whole world stopped to listen. As the evening went on, people took turns telling stories, sharing memories, and expressing hopes for the future. Buck Henderson, not usually one for speeches, raised his glass and said, "To the Cedar Creek boys, may they come home safe, and may they always remember that they've got a place here that will always be home." Dolly from the diner announced that she'd be sending care packages overseas and that every family in town had volunteered to contribute. "These boys are going to be the best-fed soldiers in the whole army," she declared to general laughter and applause. But it was toward the end of the evening, when the crowd had thinned out a bit and the music had gotten softer and more intimate, that the moment I'll never forget happened. Lizzie and I were slow dancing to a song called "I'll Be Seeing You," which Marcus was playing on guitar while Sam sang the words. The lights overhead cast everything in a warm, golden glow, and I could smell the flowers in Lizzie's hair and feel the warmth of her hand in mine. "Jake," she said softly, so only I could hear, "I want you to know something." "What's that, darling?" "Whatever happens, tonight was perfect. This whole summer was perfect, and I don't regret a single moment of it, even knowing how it has to end." I pulled her a little closer. "It doesn't have to end, Lizzie. When I come back, When you come back," she interrupted gently, "we'll see what happens then. But right now, right here, this is enough. This is everything." We danced until the last song was played and the last light was dimmed. Then I walked her back to the boarding house, and we sat on the porch swing talking until the sun started to come up over the eastern hills. "I have something for you," she said as the sky began to lighten. She reached in her purse and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside was a book, a collection of poems by Robert Frost, with an inscription on the front page in her neat handwriting. "For Jake, may these words remind you of home, and may home always remind you that you are loved. Lizzie, September 1943 inch. I know you're not much for poetry," she said with a smile, "but some of these reminded me of you, of us, of this place we both love." I opened to a page she'd marked and read the first few lines of The Road Not Taken. Even then, not knowing much about poetry, I could see why she'd chosen it. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I'll carry it with me wherever I go, and I'll be here when you get back to tell you what you missed." Sunday was my last full day in Cedar Creek, and it passed in a blur of final preparations, goodbye visits, and trying to memorize every detail of the place I was leaving behind. The whole town seemed to be moving a little slower, speaking a little softer, as if everyone was trying to make the day last longer. Monday morning, September 15th, came too soon and not soon enough. I'd packed my few belongings in an old suitcase of my daddy's, said my hardest goodbye to Mama, who cried despite her determination not to, and walked to the train station with what felt like half the town. The Cedar Creek boys were all there, Bobby, Sam, Marcus, and me, along with our families and friends. The morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of blue sky that makes you glad to be alive and sorry to be leaving at the same time. Mayor Peterson made another short speech about duty and honor and coming home safe. Buck Henderson shook each of our hands and told us to write when we could. Mary Henderson had packed enough food for a small army, convinced that the train wouldn't have decent meals. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most. Bobby's parents, who rarely showed affection in public, both hugged him tight and told him they were proud. Sam's grandmother, a tiny woman who'd come from Germany as a girl, pressed a small wooden cross into his palm and said something in German that made him smile through his tears. Marcus's whole extended family was there, and they sent him off with music and prayers and promises to keep his guitar safe until he returned. And then there was Lizzie. She'd been quiet all morning, helping with the final preparations but staying in the background, letting the families have their time. But as the train whistle sounded in the distance, she came to me. "I'm not going to cry," she said firmly. "I'm going to smile and wave, and that's the last thing you're going to see of Cedar Creek until you come home." Lizzie Dash. "No," she said, putting her fingers gently on my lips. "No sad goodbyes. Just come home, Jake Morrison. Come home and find me here." I kissed her then, right there in front of the whole town, and I didn't care who saw or what they thought. When we broke apart, she was smiling through tears she'd promised not to shed. The train pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and screech of brakes. The four of us Cedar Creek boys climbed aboard with our suitcases and our hopes and our fears and found seats by the windows. As the train started to move, I looked out at the crowd of people I'd known my whole life. There was Mama, standing straight and proud despite the tears on her cheeks. There was Mayor Peterson, waving his hat. There were the Hendersons, the Murphys, the Kowalskis, and dozens of others who become more than neighbors. They become family. And there was Lizzie, standing a little apart from the crowd, wearing that blue dress I'd first seen her in, smiling and waving just like she'd promised. The train picked up speed, and Cedar Creek got smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely behind the rolling hills. But even then, I kept looking back, trying to hold on to that last image of home. "Think we'll ever see it again?" Bobby asked quietly. Marcus strummed a few soft chords on the guitar he'd insisted on bringing. "We'll see it again," he said with quiet confidence. "Question is, will we be the same people when we do?" Sam, looking out the window at the passing countryside, said, "Maybe that's not the right question either. Maybe the question is, will we remember who we were so we can figure out who we want to become?" I thought about that as the train carried us away from everything we'd known towards something we couldn't imagine. In my pocket was Lizzie's book of poems. In my suitcase were letters from Mama and a few small things that reminded me of home. But most importantly, in my heart were the memories of that last summer in Cedar Creek. The work we'd done, the friendships we'd made, the love I'd found, and the community that had shaped us all. The war took us to places we'd never imagined and showed us things we'd never wanted to see. Bobby ended up in the Pacific, working on aircraft engines and keeping planes in the air. Sam went to Europe and somehow survived the Battle of the Bulge, though he came home quieter than he'd been before. Marcus served in a segregated unit in Italy and France, and his letters home were full of music and stories that kept our spirits up even in the darkest times. As for me, I spent 2 years in England and France, working with supply lines and occasionally seeing combat that I still don't like to talk about much. But through it all, I carried that book of poems and the memory of that last perfect night in Cedar Creek. We all made it home, the 4 of us Cedar Creek boys, though we came back at different times and in different conditions. Bobby returned first in late 1945 with a Purple Heart and a slight limp from shrapnel. Sam came back in early 1946, thinner and more serious, but with eyes that still held kindness. Marcus returned in the spring of 1946 with stories and songs, and a French bride who charmed the whole town within a week of arriving. I was the last to come home in June of 1946, almost 3 years after that September morning when we'd all climbed aboard the train together. I'll never forget walking down Main Street on that warm summer afternoon, seeing how some things had changed and others had stayed exactly the same. Murphy's General Store was still there, though Sean Murphy moved a little slower and his hair had gone completely white. The Cedar Creek Diner was still serving Dolly's chicken fried steak, though Dolly herself had passed away the winter before, and her daughter Ruth was running things now. Buck's saloon looked exactly the same, and Buck himself looked like he hadn't aged a day, though Mary Henderson confided that he'd worried about his boys every single day we were gone. But the biggest change, and the one that made my heart race as I walked toward the boarding house, was wondering whether Lizzie would still be there, still be waiting, still be the same girl I'd fallen in love with during that magical summer 3 years before. I needn't have worried. She was sitting on the porch of the boarding house, reading a book in the late afternoon sunshine, and when she looked up and saw me walking down the street with my duffel bag over my shoulder, her face lit up with a smile that could have powered the whole town. "Well," she said, standing up and smoothing down her dress. The same blue dress she'd worn the day I met her. "Look what the cat dragged in." "Miss Coleman," I said, tipping my hat in the same gesture I'd made the first time we met, "you haven't changed a bit. And you, Jake Morrison, are a terrible liar. But I'll forgive you for it." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, both of us a little older, a little more weathered by experience, but fundamentally the same people who'd fallen in love under the Cedar Creek stars. "So," she said finally, "are you going to kiss me, or are we going to stand here being polite all afternoon?" I dropped my duffel bag right there on Main Street and kissed Elizabeth Coleman like I'd been waiting 3 years to do it, which of course I had. Later that evening, after I'd been welcomed home by what felt like the entire population of Cedar Creek, after I'd sat on Mama's porch and told her everything I could tell her about where I'd been and what I'd seen, after I'd been fed more food than I could eat and hugged more times than I could count, Lizzie and I walked down to our old spot by the creek. "So," I said as we sat on the bank watching the water flow by, "what happens now?" "Well," she said, taking my hand in hers, "I've been thinking about that for 3 years. And I think what happens now is we figure out how to build a life together in the place we both love, surrounded by people who love us. Is that a yes?" "Jake Morrison," she said with that smile that had captured my heart from the very beginning. "That's the biggest yes you're ever going to hear." We were married that October in the little church at the end of Main Street, with the Cedar Creek boys as my groomsmen and half the town in attendance. Bobby had recovered from his injuries and was working at the grain elevator with Sam. Marcus had started a music school and was teaching children to play guitar and piano. And me, I'd taken over full operation of the Double M Ranch, with plans to expand and modernize while keeping the values and traditions my daddy had taught me. Lizzie kept teaching at the Cedar Creek School, and over the years she became more than just a teacher. She became the heart of the educational system for 3 counties, inspiring generations of children to love learning and to believe in themselves. We raised 4 children on the Double M, 2 boys and 2 girls, and they grew up knowing the stories of that last summer before the war, of the Cedar Creek boys, and of a community that came together when it mattered most. They learned the values of hard work, honesty, kindness, and service to others. And they learned that home isn't just a place on a map. It's the people who love you and the values you carry with you wherever you go. Shifts in the creaking chair, the sunset now painting the sky in deeper shades of red and gold. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That was a long time ago, and times have changed, and maybe stories like that don't have much relevance in today's world. But I'd respectfully disagree with you there. You see, the things that mattered in Cedar Creek in 1943, community, service, love, loyalty, doing what's right even when it's hard, those things haven't changed. They matter just as much now as they did then, maybe more so. In a world that seems to be moving faster every day, where people are more connected but somehow more isolated, where there's more information but sometimes less wisdom, the simple values of small-town life have something important to teach us. The lesson of that last night, before the war, isn't really about the war at all. It's about making the most of the time you have, about building connections that matter, about being the kind of person others can count on when times get tough. It's about understanding that life isn't just what happens to you. It's what you choose to do with what happens to you. Bobby Chun became a successful businessman, but more importantly, he became the kind of man who always had TI. It's a broken machine, or teach a young person a useful skill. Sam Reeves went on to become a teacher and eventually a principal, but he never stopped writing poetry, and he never stopped believing that quiet kindness could change the world. Marcus Washington opened that music school and spent 40 years teaching children not just how to play instruments, but how to find joy and express themselves through music. And Lizzie, my beautiful Lizzie, taught school for 35 years and touched more lives than we'll ever know. She passed away 5 years ago, come Christmas, and her funeral was the largest Cedar Creek had ever seen, with former students coming from across the country to pay their respects to the teacher who had believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. As for me, well, I try to live up to the example set by my daddy and the lessons learned during that magical summer of 1943. The Double M became one of the most successful ranches in 3 counties. But more than that, it became a place where people knew they could always find help when they needed it, work when they were willing to do it, and acceptance regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. Pauses to watch a hawk circle overhead in the gathering dusk. You know, people sometimes ask me if I have any regrets about my life, about the choices I made, about the path I took. And I always tell them the same thing. I regret the mistakes I made, the times I could have been kinder or braver or more generous. But I don't regret a single moment of that summer in 1943 or the decision to come home to Cedar Creek and build a life here with the woman I loved and the community that shaped me. That last night before the war taught me that life is precious and fragile and beautiful, and that the connections we make with other people are the only things that really matter in the end. It taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. And it taught me that home isn't just where you come from. It's where you choose to plant your roots and grow something beautiful. The Cedar Creek boys stayed friends for the rest of our lives. We were each other's best men at our weddings, godfathers to each other's children, and pallbearers at each other's funerals. We proved that the bonds forged in youth, strengthened by shared purpose and tested by adversity, can last a lifetime. Stands up slowly, bones creaking almost as much as the old porch chair. Well, friend, the sun's about set now, and I reckon that's enough jawing for one evening. But before you go, I want to leave you with something that old Buck Henderson told me the night before I left for the war. He pulled me aside at the dance, put his weathered hand on my shoulder, and said, "Jake, Life's going to throw you curveballs you never saw coming. But remember this, it ain't about avoiding the storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain. I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but I do now. Life isn't about waiting for perfect moments or ideal circumstances. It's about finding joy and meaning and connection in whatever circumstances you find yourself in. It's about being present for the people who matter to you, being useful to your community, and leaving the world a little better than you found it. The war changed all of us Cedar Creek boys in ways both big and small. But what didn't change was our commitment to the values we'd learned in that little town: honesty, loyalty, hard work, and treating others with dignity and respect. Those values saw us through the darkest times overseas, and they guided us through the challenges of building lives and families and careers when we came home. Now, I know some of you might be thinking this is just the romantic remembrances of an old man, that things weren't really as perfect as I'm making them sound. And you'd be partly right. Cedar Creek had its problems, its prejudices, its small-town petty squabbles, just like anywhere else. But what made it special was that when times got tough, when people needed help, when there was work to be done for the greater good, the community came together. People put aside their differences and focused on what united them rather than what divided them. That's a lesson I think we could all use more of these days. Walks to the porch railing, looking out over the valley as the first stars begin to appear. You see, that last night, before the war, wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning. It was the night when 4 young men and a whole community learned what it meant to care for something bigger than themselves. It was the night when we discovered that love for family, for friends, for community, for country, isn't just a feeling. It's a commitment. It's a choice you make every day to put someone else's well-being alongside your own. I married my Lizzie 6 months after I came home, and we had 47 years together before the good Lord called her home. Every morning for 47 years, I woke up grateful for that blue-eyed schoolteacher who'd had the courage to come to a small town where she didn't know a soul, and who'd had the patience to love a green young cowboy who thought he knew everything but really knew nothing at all. We raised our children to understand that privilege comes with responsibility, that freedom isn't free, and that the best way to honor those who came before you is to build something good for those who come after. 2 of our kids stayed in Cedar Creek, carrying on the family traditions. 2 moved away to pursue their own dreams, but they took the values of home with them wherever they went. Bobby Chin married a local girl named Sarah Miller, and they turned the grain elevator into the most successful agricultural supply business in the county. More importantly, they made sure that every young person who wanted to learn a trade had a place to do it, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Bobby used to say that giving someone a skill was like giving them a key to self-respect. Sam Reeves never did marry, but he became a father figure to hundreds of students over his 30 years of teaching. He started a scholarship program for kids who wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it, funded quietly from his own modest savings and the small inheritance his grandmother left him. Sam believed that education was the great equalizer, and he spent his life proving it. Marcus Washington married his French bride, Marie, and they raised 6 children who all grew up bilingual and musical. Marcus's music school became legendary throughout the region, and some of his students went on to play in symphony orchestras and jazz bands in cities across America. But Marcus was proudest of the ones who stayed home and used their music to enrich their own communities. As for me, the Double M Ranch became more than just a cattle operation. Over the years, we expanded into horse breeding, started a program to teach young people about sustainable farming practices, and established a scholarship fund for kids who wanted to study agriculture or veterinary medicine. But the thing I'm proudest of is that we never lost sight of our responsibility to our neighbors and our community. Sits back down in the creaking chair, the darkness now settling over the valley like a comfortable blanket. When people ask me what the secret was to our long marriage, to our success in business, to raising good children in a complicated world, I always come back to the lessons we learned during that summer of 1943. Work hard. Tell the truth. Keep your word. Help your neighbors. Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Love deeply and without reservation. And never forget that you're part of something bigger than yourself. Those aren't complicated principles, but living them consistently over a lifetime. Well, that's where the real challenge lies. There were times when it would have been easier to cut corners, to look the other way, to put our own interests ahead of others. But every time we were tempted, we remembered that last night before the war and the promises we'd made not just to each other, but to ourselves and to our community. The Cedar Creek of today is different from the town we left in 1943. It's bigger, more diverse, more connected to the wider world. The challenges are different too. Economic uncertainty, social change, the same kinds of divisions that seem to be pulling communities apart everywhere. But the fundamental truth remains the same. A community is only as strong as the people who are willing to invest in it, to sacrifice for it, to work together for the common good. Pauses as a cool evening breeze rustles through the trees. I think about that harvest moon dance sometimes when I'm sitting here on quiet evenings like this one. I think about the music and laughter, about the way the whole town came together to celebrate not just our departure, but our connection to each other. I think about dancing with Lizzie under those twinkling lights, about the speeches and the stories, about the way everyone seemed to understand that they were part of something special. But mostly, I think about the lesson that night taught us all, that the best way to face an uncertain future is together, with love and courage and faith in each other. The war ended, as wars do. The boys came home, as most of them did. Life went on, as life always does. But the bonds forged during that last summer before the war, the values learned and shared and lived out over decades of ordinary days, those became the foundation upon which we built everything that mattered. Now, as I sit here in the twilight of my own life, I can see the lights of Cedar Creek twinkling in the valley below. Some of the old buildings are gone, replaced by newer ones. Some of the old families have moved away, replaced by new ones with their own dreams and challenges. But the essential character of the place, that sense of community, of mutual responsibility, of shared purpose, that endures. My grandchildren and great-grandchildren are growing up in a world that would be almost unrecognizable to that 19-year-old boy who got his draft notice in the summer of 1943. They have opportunities we never dreamed of, access to information and experiences that would have seemed like magic to us back then. But they also face challenges that we couldn't have imagined: global conflicts, environmental concerns, social and economic changes that happen at lightning speed. Yet when I watch them, I see the same things that made the Cedar Creek boys special all those years ago: curiosity, determination, compassion, and a willingness to work for something bigger than themselves. They're carrying forward the best of what we try to teach them, while adding their own wisdom and perspective to the mix. Stands up one final time, walking to the edge of the porch. So what's the point of an old man's story, you might wonder? Why spend time listening to tales of a world that's long gone and people who are mostly just memories now? I think it's this. The story of that last night before the war is really the story of every generation that's ever faced uncertainty and chosen hope over fear, community over isolation, love over indifference. It's the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because they care about each other and believe in something bigger than themselves. The details change, the names, the places, the specific challenges, but the fundamental choice remains the same. We can choose to build bridges or walls, to include or exclude, to lift each other up or tear each other down. We can choose to be the kind of people our children will be proud to remember, or we can choose to be forgotten. The Cedar Creek boys chose to be remembered for the right reasons. We chose to invest in our community, to support each other through difficult times, to come home and build lives based on the values we'd learned from our parents and grandparents. We chose to believe that small acts of kindness and service, multiplied across a lifetime, could make a real difference in the world. And you know what? We were right. Turns back toward the house, where warm light spills through the windows. Now, before I head inside to my evening coffee and my memories, I want to thank you for listening to this old cowboy story. If you enjoyed it, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd hit that like button and share it with others who might appreciate a tale of simpler times and timeless values. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I got more stories where this one came from, tales of love and loss, triumph and heartbreak, and the everyday miracles that make life worth living. Most importantly, I hope you'll take something from Jake Morrison's story and apply it to your own life. Find your own Cedar Creek, that place or community or group of people where you can make a difference. Be the kind of person others can count on when times get tough. Love deeply, work hard, tell the truth, and never forget that you're part of something bigger and more important than just yourself. The sun is set on my story now, friend, but it's rising somewhere else, on new adventures and new possibilities. Make sure you're ready for whatever comes next. And remember that the best way to honor the past is to build something beautiful for the future. Until next time, this is Jake Morrison, wishing you clear skies, good friends, and the wisdom to know that every day is a gift worth unwrapping with care and gratitude. Tips his hat one final time as he disappears into the warmth and light of home. And don't forget, like and subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that there's still good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. Good night, and God bless.